So, good evening, everyone. I'm just checking that we have a connection. So, when you hear my voice, just drop a one in the chat. Let me know that audio is coming through well. I'm here today with Thunderous, or the Thunderous One, and his topic today is going to be atheism and, of course, Darwinism. And that is actually where I first learned about the topic of Darwinism from him. And then I started doing my own research and did my series, but he's the inspiration for that. So, Thunderous, welcome. Good to see you again.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Lloyd. Thank you for having me back on the show, and it's good to be back with you. Yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in at this moment.
Yeah. So, Damien, welcome. Artie Farty, Nerdy Woody, hello. Dr. Obvious, Vagabond, Tom Gyokai. Thunderous is in the chat as well. Sandro, welcome all. Good to have you. So yeah, Thunderous, do you want to kick us off? I'll add a few things a little bit later. I'll chat about a few things, but do you want to tell the audience about what it is you are planning to talk about? And
Yeah,
Canada is tuning in. Welcome, Michael.
yeah. So I suppose really when we considered the series, there've been very light discussions, not going too into depth as to my journey as to why I've come to accept the biblical narrative as a reality. There are each segment can have a couple of hours of discussion, and I'm sure I've missed many points on them because we're trying to do this sort of like spontaneously and extemporaneously. I suppose today it has to be because I've gone through why I rejected Islam, and then I went through that journey of, I suppose you could call it atheism, which is really sort of an anger towards God because of the injustices that you see in the world. And I suppose the next stage really is asking the questions whether there is a God, and this I did because there are certain truths that are subjective, and there are certain truths that are actually absolute, and they're absolute for everyone. And one of those is there either is a God or there isn't. And if there is a God, then there has to be an answer as to why there is so much injustice in the world. And if there isn't a God, then everything you've evolved to see is what you've evolved to get. So a person that's an atheist or a Darwin, or really if you're an atheist, you're a Darwinian evolutionist. So then what you're seeing in the world is pretty much what you evolved to get. You shouldn't have a problem with it. So when you're looking at all the crimes and what you perceive as injustices, they're not actually really injustices. It's just the accumulation of the chemical processes in your brain that has drawn you to the conclusion that it's injustice, when in reality it's not injustice at all, because there's no objective rules, no objective good and bad, no objective righteousness or unrighteousness. It's just matter happening in a particular manner. So I started looking at Darwinian evolution, and you know what? And I think you and I have discussed this on several occasions, that if there is a devil, and of which we know in the Bible there is, you'd have to create a belief system that has no God involved in it. But like a lot of belief systems, they tend to produce science as a basis for their credibility. Islam has done that. I know Islam has recently said things like that all their arguments that they've used in the past, that the science in the Quran, the miraculous science knowledge in the Quran is now being debunked, so they don't use it anymore. But I
Yeah,
think
Ali
anybody
Dawa
with
said that quite openly.
he said that probably to as a disclaimer of some sorts, but we both know that in other countries, or even in this country or your country or in Europe, that the scientific argument will still be used. It won't be stopped just because Ali Dawa says
Yeah,
so.
not
That
everybody
was,
got the memo. Fair
yeah,
enough.
exactly. So and the same thing with atheism. For atheism to be to have any credibility, it has to have a scientific background. But you'll notice the cleverness in the way that it presents itself. People say the word atheism, but then they'll try and use they'll try and use emotional arguments. But if they say they're a Darwinian evolutionist, then they'll have to use logical arguments and science-based arguments, which Darwinian evolution hasn't. And I'm going to go into that in a moment. But so just to start with, to the audience, I'm going to mention some names and maybe one or two organizations. Just because I mentioned those names or because I mentioned those organizations does not mean I subscribe to them. I merely cite them as reference points that I would encourage the listening audience to maybe look into to see why I've drawn the conclusions that I have done, that Darwinian evolution is by far the sickest, most vile, most evil, the most obnoxious nefarious and the most mendacious doctrine on humanity out there. There's nothing worse than Darwinian evolution. It is by far more insidious than Islam, because Islam, for
Actually,
all its faults,
sorry to interrupt there. Obviously, I agree. Let me just show the audience. I've just dropped a title called "In Defense of Islam" in the chat, and I've dropped a link to it, just based on what Thunderous just told us. I want to show you this. This is an Islamic text. I've just dropped it in the chat right now. This is one of the most common dawah manuals, which is taught to Muslims to use in their online dawah, right? So this basically has a whole bunch of arguments you'll see here. Let's go through some of this. How to use this book, right? So they can look up various arguments. So you can save things from it. So the basics of Islam. So proving the preservation of the Quran, removing doubts about the text of the Quran. Okay, there are no added verses or missing verses in the Quran. Okay, borrowing theories, plagiarization refuted, page 46. I mean, let's just jump into this. So how to answer allegations, and they show you then how to do some of this stuff. Right, so for instance here, to talk about what is Islam, then they've got all of these links, and the student is supposed to go to these links and then repeat whatever he finds there. Right, so as you go through this, so let me just go through more of this. This is how they do this. So they've got these books, which is why they always have the same arguments, because they repeat things literally from copy-paste sources. This is just one of them. There's another one that I have somewhere, but this one is, so basically they just copy-paste, and they have these links, and that's how they all say the same thing. This is sent around. So yeah, so that's why they have the same arguments repeated over and over.
yeah, and you'll notice that all those arguments will be sort of like spearheaded by a scholar, because just like Darwinian evolution, the scholars and imams are probably their first port of call as to, if you ask a Muslim a question, the first thing they're going to do is there won't be citing the Quran. It'll be, go speak to this scholar, go listen to that scholar. So that's the gatekeeping employed there. And the same thing with Darwinian evolution. It's not let's discuss the science or let's discuss the process of what you're suggesting to see if it's possible. It's quote this Nature magazine, quote that scholar, or quote that scientist. So it's never about the subjects with these people. But when you get into the subjects, that's where it all starts to fall apart. And you and I, Lloyd, have spoken recently about one guy that's actually come up in the forums of science, particularly on YouTube. This is a guy I recommend as far as his science is concerned, and nothing more. If people choose to listen to him for other reasons, then that's at your discretion. But the science he brings to the table with reference to abiogenesis is by far irrefutable. And abiogenesis, or origin of life, is the suggestion that at some point in time, when the universe came from nothing, that's Lawrence Krauss, and then expanded, and then the earth came to be, and blah, 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 and it rained on the rocks, and the rocks broke down in their chemical components, and there was a primordial soup or goo, and then in that primordial soup or goo, a cell happened to come into existence.
Can you pause there for a moment? You just mentioned, which was the scientist that said the universe came from nothing? What was his name?
Lawrence Krauss.
Lawrence Krauss. Now, I've discussed him on my talks on atheism in the past, and I've spoken about that particular theory that the universe just literally came from nothing, and he says that nothing is actually filled with something, filled with stuff. So he redefines nothing. So they actually have to redefine the word nothing to mean something, right? So it's not true nothing. And then basically the whole atheist enterprise is based on, if you give us one free miracle in the beginning, we will explain all of the rest. However, this idea of Lawrence Krauss's actually comes from a Scottish Enlightenment thinker and philosopher called David Hume. Right, and this is where, and I will be discussing this as well, because I've got the notes. Let me show everyone actually just briefly. This is another presentation I'm busy working on. This is, again, Pius X, talking about Pius X's oath against modernism. So we're looking at Enlightenment philosophers, and David Hume, David Hume had, let's explain this idea then briefly. The whole point of the Enlightenment, besides being an occult, shall we say, besides being a rebirth of the occult under the name science, right? It was an attack on the Catholic Church explicitly, it, Christianity in general, but the Catholic Church in specific. And for instance, just as they applied nominalism to language and to words to undermine meaning in terms of words and logos, they also had to apply nominalism in the same concept to cause and effect. So the Enlightenment thinkers started to literally undermine and to state that there is no such thing as cause and effect. For instance, to give you a practical example and talk about how Hume got rid of this idea and how the idea of coming from nothing was justified by these idiot atheists. When you see a billiard ball and you hit the ball with a cue, the ball rolls. You see the ball roll. You see the ball gets hit by a cue. Then the ball rolls. Then it hits another ball. And then the first ball stops and the second ball takes off. So David Hume says, when you see cause and effect, that the power is being transferred, that energy is transferred into the ball and the ball rolls and the ball hits the other ball and then energy is transferred. He says, how do you know? That's not true. That's definitely not happening. How do you know? All you know is what you are seeing, and that's in your head. All you're seeing is three events, or two events. One, a cue hits a ball, or three events. A cue hits a ball, the ball moves. That's another event. Then the ball hits another ball, and the other ball moves. All you can say is a ball was hit, and the ball rolled. Then the ball hit another ball, and the other ball rolled. Nothing happened in between. For all you know, that ball just rolled for no reason whatsoever. It just decided, hey, it's a great time to roll. All you can say is that this ball happened to be next to that ball and the other ball rolled. Or when a guy kicks a ball in football, right, his foot hits the ball and the ball takes off across the field. You can't say that the man kicked the ball and energy was transferred, because in your brain you don't know that, you don't feel that, you can't see that. It's an illusion. So you are lying when you say that there was an energy transfer, because you don't know that. All that happened was you saw a foot touch the ball, and the ball just decided, you know what, I feel like flying 50 meters down the field. Or that's all you can say. And you saying that your foot kicking the ball caused the ball to move, or the other one ball hitting the other caused it to move, that is just pure speculation. And in fact, what this means is that balls can decide to just roll on their own for no reason. So we should occasionally be seeing balls just randomly jump in the air and head for the goal, or jump in the air and run down the field, or snooker balls should just randomly just roll towards pockets for no reason at high speed. And he says, yeah, that's exactly how reality works, because enlightenment nonsense. So you see that, so they got rid of cause and effect. They have to destroy the idea of reason. They have to destroy the idea of logos. And that's where Lawrence Krauss gets his stupid ideas, from an even stupider David Hume. Thunderous, your thoughts on that?
Well, I just find it a remarkable bunch of coincidences that when the cue ball, but who is actually with the cue hitting the ball? If the cue is hitting the ball, who's holding the cue, causing the cue to hit the ball? Where does the power initially, or the transference of energy originally come from? And it seems to be a bunch of coincidences that the ball hits.
Exactly. The gymnastics, as Artsy Farts is saying, the mental gymnastics you have to do in your brain to deny the obvious. You need to have more faith to believe in this trash than you do to simply just believe in basic physics. So literally, some of the top names in history went around and said there's no such thing as cause and effect. It's an antiquated, stupid idea that we need to get rid of.
And the thing is, you see, as far as the evidence is concerned, the evidence is exactly the same for everybody that's observing the event. There's not somebody has more evidence or lesser evidence. It's exactly the same evidence. So fundamentally, what it comes down to is just a mere interpretation of the evidence that's beforehand. Some will say a mind did it. There's a mind, or there's a deliberate act, because the cue transferred energy to the cue ball. The cue ball hit, say, the red ball at the precise speed, at the precise angle for the red ball to go into a pocket, but for the white ball, the cue ball, to come off a cushion and then coincidentally stand in such a position where it can now pop the black. All of that is, nothing did that. It's all coincidence, and it's your interpretation of events.
Yeah, and how can you know? Because are you the ball? Can you feel the ball? Do you have extra sensory perception to feel that, Thunderous? It's all speculation on your part. Because all you've got is your brain, and your brain cannot. Do you know that your brain cannot interact with the outside world. You have literally no connection to the outside world.
No, well, but the outside world is predicated on our senses, though, which is something that they would have to say is nothing more
So,
than.
do you understand? This is reality denial. This is
Yes.
gaslighting. This is the Enlightenment. Reality denial, gaslighting on an amazing scale.
And it's predicated on these things. This is why we have the movements that we're seeing in the world today. They all have to have a basis, and scientism is that basis in order to get those lifestyles legalized as normal, when in reality they are totally contradictory and an abhorrence to the human being nature and psyche, and from objective moral law, as far as objective moral laws are concerned. Yet they're normalized now. And the irony is as a result of Darwinian evolution, we are now living in a world where morality, objective morality that makes sense, are now deemed as being outdated, old, or a brainwashed formula brought into existence from man-made religions. Anybody
Yeah.
that would only have to look into history and see that that doesn't make, because the further back you go into a theistic society, the more normal, the more moral, and the more cohesive society was in comparison to what we have today.
Yeah. No, and all of these ideas, these modern ideas, stem from these idiots that we call Enlightenment thinkers, these Enlightenment philosophers, which is supposed to be the age of reason, and atheists will typically refer to the thinking that occurred during the Enlightenment as their source of, or their foundation, let's say, as they,
They,
yeah,
they call it the age of reason whilst being unreasonable.
yeah,
Whilst being unreasonable based on the evidence.
yeah. I mean, let me give you a simple example for the audience. This is something I'm busy working on. I'm still working on a few slides. I've finished some slides and I'm working on additional slides. This again ties into the discussion by Pope Pius X on modernism. So this is a second look from a completely different perspective on modernism again. But this is a slide in the Enlightenment. These Enlightenment philosophers are supposed to have discovered reason, discovered the right answers. They've discovered the perfection of answers through science. So, for instance, here's the question: can people be trusted to govern? Right? And Thomas Hobbes says, of course not. People are evil, stupid, and selfish. You can't trust them. You need a totalitarian, strong government to hold people in check. And of course, John Locke says, yes, people are good and they can reason. We have natural rights. You've just seen recently how someone on television, on I think CNN or something, was saying that people who believe that rights are natural and come from God are extremists. Of course, she just, as an American, doesn't know what her own constitution says and what the founding fathers said. So she just called the founding fathers extremists. Then, of course, you've got someone like Rousseau. Yes, we all participate in direct democracy with a social contract, except direct democracy would only work in very small societies. And then, of course, you've got people like Aristotle. No, only educated people can vote. Then, of course, you've got maybe other societies where no, only the aristocracy can vote. And then, of course, Plato says, no. You can't have voting. You can't trust people to govern. You'd have mob rule. Only the philosopher kings like us, the smart scientists like us. And then, of course, Queen Elizabeth has no, I have a divine right to rule. Now, here's the thing. These are the Enlightenment philosophers who have all the right answers, except none of them can agree. So who's right? But they're atheists, of course. Okay, so which philosopher do we follow? Because none of these people agree. So there you go. That's atheist wisdom. I mean, they all completely disagree. They have contradictory views. Their philosophies don't gel. And of course, but we need to somehow. So just like Protestants, sadly, who's right? Back to you, Thunderous.
With the one with the most influence, eh? And it's, you seem to be the person that makes the decision is always electing themselves as the one to be the one to make the decision.
Yeah.
So yeah, so just going on with everything, the primordial soup, and I do, as I say, I don't endorse any of these people's or these organizations' scriptural view on the Bible, but the science is irrefutable, and the guy I'm going to name in this instance would be Dr. James Tour. Now, Dr. James Tour is a scientist, and he's the only theistic scientist at the moment that's leading the arguments that it is absolutely preposterous to consider that a living cell, came into existence via just what the origin of life scientists are calling a natural process of chemical reactions. that's how we get the first living cell. And he has broken down the science, because that is his field, chemistry, that it's impossible for RNA, DNA, and proteins, the sophistication that each one of those have, proteins and RNA, how that they could have ever have come together, how they link to each other. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go too much into the science behind it. I would thoroughly recommend people to watch one of his science arguments as to why he actually calls out the scientists as liars. He will say, he will be quite open that there is no evidence for any of the mumbo jumbo that they speak about. That, and it's something that you mentioned a moment ago, where they have to redefine the terms, that something is nothing. So nothing is actually something in itself. And you'll find that science does that when they're getting to a point where they've got no argument. They have to redefine the terms or redefine what words. I mean, Muslims have been doing that. You've only got to ask a Muslim that when they turn around and say that the miraculous event of the Quran, well, you have to understand what the word bloody miracle means as far as a Muslim is concerned. And when you start looking at the term, it doesn't qualify with identifying the Quran as being a miraculous event. So the same thing with Lawrence Krauss redefining the word nothing. For example, if I went to the bank and I said I want to buy a car, and the bank manager turns around and says, well, you've got zero in your account, you've got nothing in your account, I'm not then going to turn and say, yeah, but that's still something, so give me something then. The mental gymnastics, as you say, it's absolutely absurd. So with James Tour, he is showing the world the science, and also how science works with scientists, and why that they continue these lies, because the lies of the origin of life research is actually funded, and the funder controls the information. So he quotes Lee Cronin when Lee Cronin was questioned about origin of life, and he makes the comment that the origin of life research is a scam. So I thoroughly recommend people to listen to James Tour, and how it is impossible for the first cell to have come into existence by natural events. I did, when I listened to many of his talks, I did try and come up with my own kind of illustration as to how to help people understand what it is that James Tour is trying to say. And the closest I can think of is, like, I don't know if you're familiar with what a cake called the Victoria sponge. In essence, it's 2 parts cake, but in the middle you've got jam and you've got fresh cream, and then it's dusted off on the top with, say, ice and sugar. But wheat, eggs, sugars, fruits, and creams, they all have chemical compositions in themselves. But if we leave the chemical compositions for a moment and just think of the principle that when you prepare the batter for the sponge, it then has to be put into an oven. Now, the composition of, say, flour and other products, milk or egg, have to be in a certain consistency. Too much or too little, and the cake fails in the oven. The cake has to go into the oven. It has to be at a certain temperature, and it has to be there for a certain time. Otherwise, it's undercooked or it's overcooked and effectively burns. Then the same thing goes with jam. How you make jam is actually a process in itself, because you have to use sugars, you have to use fruits, and you have to heat it up to a high temperature.
And all of these ingredients have to be available at the same time. They've all got to be ready to go. And the sequence and the timing must be perfect.
Exactly that. Even the whipping of double cream into thick cream, it's a process in itself. If you stop too soon, it goes back into being runny cream again. And if you beat it too much, it effectively what's known as breaks. And then there are the temperatures that you have to apply all these things in. Now, that's a very crude illustration, but nobody would ever say that if you got the chemicals all together, the composition of cream, or even if you just put cream and flour or the cake batter mix and jam and just put it in a jar, that if you left it given enough period of time, that a cake would come out into a Victoria sponge, would come into existence. Nobody would ever conclude that. Yeah, but something far more, infinitely more sophisticated, the first human cell, and the origin of life scientists will say, yes, this has come about by natural processes. And the irony is this: when you look at, say, the mathematical equations that have been worked out about as far as time is concerned for each component,
there's not enough time in the universe so far.
The universe, exactly that. Yeah, exactly. The
universe. Someone mentioned the cell earlier. Darwin thought the cell was just a homogeneous blob of goo. Yeah. And we're learning today that the more we get better technology to study cells, the more we discover that cells are more and more complex. They are nanofactories. They are like supercomputers internally, like, or they operate like circuitry, like circuit boards. They are highly sophisticated with very sophisticated feedback. But also, when people look at DNA, it's code. It's computer code, effectively. But also, there is encryption. There is and then I discovered in one section they have, like, let's say you've got a section of code. Let's say you've got 1,000 characters of code, right, within the DNA. So that 1,000 characters happens to have a certain function. However, what they'll say is the previous 1,000 characters will have another function. And let's say the next 1,000 characters of DNA have a function. But then what they'll find is that 500 characters into the first, halfway through the first section and halfway into the current section, somehow that section of code is independent, and it's another section of instructions that is somehow superimposed on top of existing code. It's like code written on top of code that it's like they said the complexity to achieve this consistently is it's beyond imagining. This is not something that can be done without intention. Intention only comes from a mind, again. So DNA just becomes more complex, and understanding of the cell and as a factory becomes more complex, not less complex, not simpler, and moving further and further away from Darwin's ideas. And there's lots of issues with Darwin's theories that are now cropping up due to science, and the idea of, yeah, Darwin's idea really needs to be rethought. But of course, atheists want to fight tooth and nail to not admit that there are issues.
It doesn't need to be rethought. It needs to be removed. That's what it needs. It needs to be removed, because there's nowhere else to go. These things can't happen. Obviously, some people will say things like, "Oh, well, aliens must have come and seeded the earth." I know Richard Dawkins says that. It's on my channel in a documentary called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. But that just changes the location of how life began. And when you consider how improbable it is, like as we were just about to discuss, the universe hasn't been in existence long enough just for the cell to have come about. And the thing is, you see, when you're looking at the cell, even with my entry level of intelligence as far as this subject is concerned, you can deduce that ultraviolet light would be harmful to organic matter. You've only got to stand out in the sun too long yourself, and you can get skin cancer from it. Your eyes could be damaged from you ultraviolet light. So these things, the temperatures, the water. If you put some, say for instance, I don't know if anybody's ever done this. If you have a glass of water and you pour, say a juice or another different colored fluid into that cup, you'll find that those molecules are dispersed. Without any effort on your part, they will disperse. Obviously, depending on, say, the density. But normally, if it's not dense, it disperses in the water. So water has a natural ability of pushing chemicals apart, not pulling chemicals together. And I don't think James Thorne mentions that. It's just something that I observed, just going through life.
Water, it has a pH level. It actually acts like an acid, generally. Yes.
So these things, the more you, this is about the comic of the comments about discussion. These things are not discussed because they don't want to be discussed. That's why they're handed over to the gatekeepers of the sciences. And then when you've gone past the fact that the cell can't come about by itself, and then you go into, say, as you've just done now with the information inside, I think they talk about, if you unravel a cell, how long the information is and the amount of information.
But also, who created the covering around the cell to protect it from the external environment? There's also those questions. And also, a cell has to have entry and egress, so nutrients have to enter and waste has to exit. And that takes massive regulation. How did this happen accidentally? And how did it replicate? How did all of those things come together at the right temperature, exposed to the atmosphere of a supposedly very, very radioactive, very volatile Earth?
Because if you go further back in time, this is the point. The further back in time you go, if you go by the Darwinian model, the Earth is a lot more violent and chaotic and haphazard than what we have today. We have regulatory weather patterns. Okay, they can be extreme at times, but we can pretty much see that they are regular. And there are periods in human history or Earth's history where they're kind of normal. Every now and again, we have a peak and a trough as far as weather is concerned. But the further back in time you go in their model, the Earth is more chaotic. You've got lightning everywhere. You've got storms everywhere. You've got volcanoes. You've only got to look at the images of of Earth back in that period of time, and to see the environment as it was suggesting that the cell came about. And then, as you've just mentioned there, it replicated. I
Yeah.
mean, just how the heck does the first cell replicate? Why? And how did it do the process of replicating? If it's a cell and it replicated itself, that must mean it divided. And if you take any matter and you divide, and it's a whole, say it weighs a pound, I'll use weight in this illustration, and you divide it, then you've divided it so it's now smaller, and each component is only half pound each in weight. So you've reduced the size, and therefore you've reduced the mass. There's no explanation beyond that. And then how long did the cell live in order for it to go on and go on and go on to become life as we see everywhere on Earth? So it's only when you start.
Go on, sorry.
No, it's only when you start asking these sort of questions that you got me intrigued as to, well, how far does this go then, as to, and then you start questioning other things like there is no fossil record, there is no transitional fossil record ever found in the history of paleontology. You have found whole creatures, and I'll go on to that later on with reference to whale evolution. Because I know that's, but
let me just bring something up maybe from my side, just to talk about something that's upcoming, because it's actually very topical. It's interesting that you're thinking on the same lines as I am, but I will be talking about, these are raw slides. This is unedited, so I'm still working on this. This is from a scientific paper that I got on researchgate.net. But a couple of things. So according to a well-known philosopher and historian, Silvano Boruso, of historian, the Enlightenment had two major effects: a perennial confusion of the spiritual with the material level of human nature, and the complete separation of morality from economics and politics. So with the Enlightenment, we had politics divorced from morality, right? So that already is a problem, as well as economics. So if we're wondering why we have predatory banking and predatory politics, well, you can thank the Enlightenment for that. And then key Enlightenment tenets are: they claim that human reason is the only source of knowledge. Now, according to human reason, balls can just start bouncing or moving off at high speed for no reason that you can discern, because there's no way for your mind to know what's happening outside of it. So human reason, according to their subjective definition of reason, of course, progress is inevitable. Progress, that's progressives. That's where you get the idea of progressives. If you wanted, with the whole communist concept of progressivism. And nothing existed beyond nature, so the supernatural was a myth, but these guys believe in nothing creating something, matter creating life. And and then they also speak of reason being the only source of knowledge is reductive. It's actually reductionist. Faith is also a type of knowledge, and based on the lack of evidence for certain positions that are held by atheists, they are also taking a faith-based position. Except, of course, I discussed most recently that they are taking a mystical position. They are mystics, and they are claiming to be rational. They're claiming, but they are really just mystics who are having a faith experience. The whole enterprise is based on effectively their feeling, and so it's just a really, really odd. They reject religion, but they really have their own mystical religion, and so also based on, anyway, so I'll leave it at that because I need to edit these, but just your thoughts on some of this.
Well, for me, straight away, the first thing I'm thinking of, this is just man replacing God. All they want to do is there's an interesting scripture in Jeremiah. Well, there's actually two. If you consider Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 1, where it talks about man dominating man to his injury. That would be one scripture that comes to my mind. But I think in reference to what you've just said now, I think the most pertinent scripture would be Jeremiah 10:23. Could you bring that up? Jeremiah.
Yeah, just a moment before I go to Jeremiah 10:23. Just for instance, Descartes, he argued that our senses are unreliable. So human senses are unreliable. So anything your mind tells you has to be questioned because you're probably wrong. And therefore, you can't listen to your senses. You have to listen to reason, because your mind lies to you about the outside world. So if you put a stick in water, you see that the stick bends. And he's saying, no, your mind is lying to you because the stick is not bent. But that's not true. Your mind is telling you the facts. The light has been refracted and therefore
Yes.
your eyes are seeing a refracted image. So there's a parallax issue. However, your brain knows that the stick did not bend. So he's claiming that your senses lie, therefore you can't listen to your senses, when he's simply misinterpreting the situation. So they so basically they're simply misrepresenting reality, misrepresenting truth and fact, and then imposing their own supposed new answers. They the balls can move by themselves, and in fact, so for instance, if you drop a rock, it falls downwards. Well, there's going to come a time when the rock will fall upwards because cause and effect and things. That's just how we're just wrong. So yeah, we get
Yeah.
to
So
Jeremy. Yep.
Yeah, Jeremiah 10:23, and I think this is where it all comes in as to why we have the many philosophies that we do today and what the end game is.
So here we go. So
So it
that's the
says there, Lord, I know that people's lives are not their own.
oh,
It is not for them to direct their steps. Now, what do you think that means?
thy will be done rather than my will be done.
Notice this. So I know that people's lives. So, is there any other translations we can pull up on that? Maybe other different
Yeah,
translations of
let me
that
go
scripture. Some of
to
them, because some of them make it a little bit more clearer.
yeah, let me do this. Let me bring up Blue Letter Bible. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so KJV, the way of man is not in himself.
Yeah,
He is not man that walketh to direct his steps. Which version do
yeah.
you want?
Anyone. I mean, that gave a better translation. But if we use two or three of them, then we can
Let's
get
use
the sense.
NASB, so North American Standard Bible.
I know, O Lord, that man's way is not in himself, nor is it in man who walks to direct his steps. So the fundamental crucial point in what the scripture is saying, Jeremiah is inspired to write, we are not designed to govern ourselves, and we're not supposed to be sitting in the seat of God. Notice what it says in the latter part of the verse. Oh, sorry, I wait until you finish. It says, nor is it in man who walks to direct his steps. We weren't designed for other human beings to sit in the office of God and direct other human beings, and that's the point. So when you're looking at all these philosophies and men making decisions and making rules over men, in effect, what they're doing, they're sitting in the seat of God by guiding other human beings. That is God's role, to objectively to give mankind objective rules of what to obey and what direction to go in. But what they've done is they've stolen the seat of God, and they presume to sit in that seat, and they are making the directions themselves for other human beings.
Yeah, no, but then they reject reason. Also, something you mentioned earlier, which I will be discussing in the near future, is the idea of truth. Now, we've basically, you can see the world is regressing. We're going back to a time that doesn't have logos. They've rejected logos. They've rejected logic and reason, the laws of logic, and of course they reject historical fact, because as Christians we believe that there was a birth of Jesus. There was God came to earth, was born as a man, he died, he resurrected, and he ascended into heaven. Now, if history is correct, if eyewitness is correct, if this is evidence, then humans should accept historical evidence as fact, right? Then we would believe that this is true. The whole point is that the aim of the Enlightenment and all these crazy philosophies I've been discussing on the channel, these people reject the truth. They reject evidence. So if you reject truth, then you will not accept these things, and therefore you will fall into error and you will fall into sin. And that's the ultimate concept. But from a Christian perspective, the truth begins with the fact that we have a historical truth in the religion. It's not based on myth. Someone was born, died, resurrected, went to heaven, and was God who lived on earth. So this is the truth. And if you start with that as the truth, then you're connected to the whole moral concept of God, and God as being, and God as his character inherent in nature, and then trying to follow that. Hopefully I'm making some sense here, but if you don't, you immediately separate and disconnect from those concepts, and then you come up with your own random human-made concepts. And we've seen where these lead at the end of the day. That you
Yeah,
have the opposite of truth. Yeah.
and I think you're so true in what you're saying there. That I think the way that the world is being deliberately manipulated to make mankind more cynical and critical of what information they receive and what they perceive as being truth. So this is why you have certain phrases like you have your own truth. You can make up your own truth. Your truth is your own. So it's more of a subjective truth than an objective absolute truth. So truth is now just a word that you use to apply in your own life, and it's true to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true to anybody else.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
that's another reason why we have as much chaos as what we do. But you were saying there about there are certain fundamentals to take into consideration. But to arrive to the same conclusion that the biblical narrative is telling the truth, there are many routes to that. For instance, my route was just to work out whether there is a God or not. If there is an intelligent designer, was my first premise. And then the process of elimination naturally leads you to conclude that whatever the truth is, the Bible is telling the truth. And whoever Jesus is the key to unlocking the truth that's in the Bible. There's no way around that. Jesus is too much of a bigger figure in history that time is based on him, that you can turn around and say that whatever the truth is, he's got nothing to do with it. And to mention a point that you raised a few months ago is that how desperate so many religions are to co-opt Jesus into their faith system.
yeah.
So he can't be that much of an insignificant figure to be ruled out as to whatever the
It's
truth is.
interesting, yeah. If he didn't exist, then how come everyone's interested in co-opting him? Or if he's unimportant, then why does everybody want to claim him? And
Yeah, exactly that.
I mentioned earlier that in terms of the Enlightenment, it started to blur or got rid of the distinction between spirit and matter. Basically, spirit was just matter doing things, right? So there's no real mind. It's just matter acting, and then you have this illusion of mind or spirit. But interestingly, what I'm getting, and I'm still busy working on this, that if we say that everything is just matter or just spirit alone, like the Gnostics only believed in spirit, whereas you've got the atheist believing in just matter, then there's no differences, therefore there's no comparison, there's no distinctions. And then there's no meaningful distinctions, everything blurs, which means you have no contrasting opposites. You no longer have a difference and a separation between good and evil. Nothing between right and wrong. There's no opposites anymore. Everything is one thing. Therefore, you destroy morality. So they're so busy trying to deny one side of reality that eventually they just simply destroy morality in the process.
Yeah,
And
but it also allows for the goalposts to keep moving, because if you have objective moral rules set by a divine creator, right, those rules are absolute. I mean, I think it's in the book of Malachi where the God of the Bible says, I have not changed, meaning his standard of justice and right and wrong has not changed. There's still the same standards as they've always been. That those are absolutes. However, when you remove objective theistic moral values, and you start having men make up their own rules, then the goalposts can move. As time moves, those goalposts get moved as well. For instance, a paedophile was a paedophile. Now a paedophile is not a paedophile anymore. A paedophile is now a minor attracted person. So you're actually reducing the crime.
No, MAP is minor attracted pedophile. Let's just correct that little.
So there's a subtle difference between, yeah.
Well, you've seen what
But
Google's Gemini has done, this AI. When you ask it, is child sacrifice wrong? Google Gemini literally says, this is a very nuanced discussion, and one has to look at the culture and the circumstances and the religious background of the people. So you cannot simply say it's wrong because it's based really on the cultural aspects and the time of the people. And it might be right in one culture, but in another culture it's quite acceptable. That is Google Gemini talking about child sacrifice. It says the same about pedophilia. Clearly we're seeing this whole woke concept now in AI. It's in corporate. It's that is their company policy.
yeah, and you can ask the same question about, for instance, is euthanasia right or wrong? And now we know in Canada, if you have a mental illness, which is a very broad term now, because what is and what isn't a mental illness these days, you can apply for self euthanasia. So
yeah, and these are things that the Nazis were tried at Nuremberg and killed for. They were
Yeah.
hung for that. That was a war crime. And now it's medical practice 101 in Canada.
And what's the other one? Obviously, we all know about the abortion laws now. Pretty much anybody can have abortion. It's seen to be like as a human right, my body, my choice, apart from the choice of the body that's inside the human being in the first place. But that's an argument that can go on and on and on. But it's an ever-changing goalpost, though, and that's what happens when you have man-made rules and man-made society governed by other men, because the rules can keep changing. And when they do change, you'll find that they're not changing for the better. They're changing for the worse, and society is becoming more and more debased and immoral. We used to have in England, and I'm sure in other countries they had their own sort of like cultural phrases for it, but living in sin, that's a man and woman not married living together, is now, was living in sin. And if you had a child outside of wedlock, the child was a bastard. Now it's kind of like, well, find somebody who's married and has their own children inside of wedlock. That's the abnormal, and living in sin is the standard. And most children are bastards now. Most children are illegitimate. You can have one man now where he can have 3 or 4 children by 3 or 4 different women. That's now seen as a normal way. And you add all these things, and it's now being recognized that the absence of a father in the home is what's leading one of the leading causes of juvenile delinquency.
Yeah,
And this is
yeah, like 80% of the men in prison for hardcore crime have no father at home, something like that.
and that can be also sort of like associated with women that do pornography. Most of them is because their father wasn't either at home or what proved to be an inadequate father. So obviously the father-daughter relationship wasn't as it should be, which has led, for the woman to misuse her desire for attention in the correct way, to abuse the body in an incorrect way. But obviously pornography, there's nothing wrong with it because it does no harm as far as today's atheistic moral views are concerned. It's just another form of entertainment. In fact, devices are now put into people's hands so that a child can watch pornography or extreme violent crimes as and when they feel the need to. But just going back to because I know time's running short, because we've only got about 10 minutes left. I just want to leave, the whole subject of Darwinian evolution, I would love to have a Q&A on Darwinian evolution with the people listening to the show, just so I can give you some sort of like the experiences that I've got and some of the information that I have read. Before I go into the next point, I just want to bring out another book that I read, and I've read many books, but probably the most influential book that I've read as far as Darwinian evolution is concerned. And it's come from an organization that you call the Jehovah's Witnesses. However, I did pick up a book from them because very few religious organizations actually produce information on Darwinian evolution. But there is one book that they released called Life, How Did It Get Here, by Evolution or Creation. I don't know if it's available anymore because I think they don't even do books or magazines anymore, apart from track. I think they do that standing by the road with trolleys now.
Yeah.
But I think you can get it on their app. So I'll repeat the name of the book, Life, How Did It Get Here, by Evolution or Creation, by Jehovah's Witnesses. I am not endorsing the organization, but I am endorsing that book. You can skip the chapters that deal with their theistic belief, fine. But the science in that book, and the book was released in 1986, is absolutely incredible. Anybody who reads that book, if they've got doubts as to whether Darwinian evolution is true or not, you read that book because it covers mutations, it covers transitional fossil records, it covers the mathematical equations as far as the galaxies are concerned, it covers a whole heap of subjects in the many chapters that are inside the book. There is no way you will ever go back to Darwin. In fact, you'll become more incensed with Darwinian evolution. Deals with migrating patterns of birds. It deals with how certain like from amphibians, I think it was amphibians, to mammals and reptiles, how the eggs in these creatures, how they release urine. I think in the soft tissue membranes of eggs, urine is sort of seeps through the membrane. Yet within a solid egg, the urine goes into a sac. But then for reptiles, it goes through the soft membrane again. So how did evolution do that process? But anyway, that is a book that I recommend, though I'm not in the slightest suggesting the organization. But just to conclude on, I want to raise something. There was a discussion with Harris Sultan, And did I say Harris Sultan? I didn't say Harris Satan, did I? I
Yeah.
hope not.
Harris Sultan. Yeah.
Harris Sultan, and he had a conversation with the apostate prophet, and both of them are atheists. And Harris Sultan, um, rather sarcastically defending evolution, commenting about Pakistan, commented about there's even a creature to prove evolution called Pakicetus. Now, I just want to dwell on that creature for a moment. For anybody that knows anything about Pakicetus, it is suggested to be a creature that is the precursor to whales. Okay, so let's follow the logic through. Whales are mammals. And so evolution, and I could have gone from any creature, but I'm going to stick with this creature. It's one of my favorites to try and disprove evolution with people. The suggestion is two mammals, a male and female, a pink one and a blue one, decided to go into the sea, and that is where you get whales from. Now, I've read the book The Devil's Delusion by Dr. David Belinsky. He comments on this. And he turns around and says, he doesn't comment too much on it, he just asks one question. If you wanted to turn your car into a submarine, how many modifications would you have to make for the car to become a submarine? So if I asked you the question then, Lloyd, what kind of engineering or structural understanding would you need to have in order to turn your car into a submarine? What would you need to understand?
You're going to
As far as
change
the
literally
engineering
everything. First, you go, how do you make that car watertight?
Yeah.
Right? And then you've got to, I mean, the whale, I've read through that. I've read the book. I have a copy of the book, David Belinsky's The Devil's Delusion. I mean, to think that four-footed animal became a whale. I mean, the engineering, literally the engineering. And they said there's something like more than 50,000 different
Yes.
changes that have to occur that you would have to make. I mean, it's a completely different animal entirely.
That's a conservative estimation. So you'd have to understand propulsion will be totally different. The streamlining of the creature in water, how it moves through water, would have to be totally different. Okay, the digestive system would have to be different. Understanding water pressure would have to be different. The skin would have to be a new type of skin that covers the creature. Not only more streamlined, but so it also has to have a certain amount of fat content in order to keep the creature warm in the sea. Okay, so there are numerous modifications that have to take place for turning whatever the land creature was into a mammal. And bear in mind, these will have to happen simultaneously, exactly the same between a male and a female. So you've got Harris Sultan and the apostate prophet laughing, thinking, "Wow, we've got evidence for evolution." Well, my response to you two guys is, "Well, come on the show, let's talk about it." Okay, look me up, find Lloyd, find me, you know where we are. And let's talk about whale evolution. I would like these people to explain to me. For instance, most land mammals have their testicles on the outside of their body. One of the reasons why land mammals have testicles on the outside of the body is because the heat within the body generated will kill the sperm. Hence why testicles are on the outside. Not all, but most land mammals. So we have to assume that the land mammal that turned into a whale had testicles on the outside. We've got no reason to not conclude that. However, if the testicles are on the inside of the whale, what's happening there? Surely the heat generated by the whale will kill the semen in the testicles. But not really. What's happened is the blood vessel wiring has had to be replumbed. And now the dorsal fin has capillaries and vessels on the edge of the dorsal fin, where as the whale's moving through the water, the blood cools down. That circuitry of blood then passes over the testicles, keeping the testes at a temperature at a temperate rate. So the temperature neither goes nor up nor down; it stays consistent. How the heck did blind chance formulate this blood
Yeah,
redirected
but it's
of
an
the
entire series of blind chance events, apparently.
exactly. Then
Artsy
think
Fartsy
about
has a very good question. Don't they believe that mammals came from fish? So why would mammals leave the ocean and then go back into the ocean and evolve again to go back to the. Yeah, so
Well,
they evolve from fish to go to the land, to go from the land to evolve back into a fish. That makes
that
no sense.
Of course it doesn't. This is it. Where do you want to start with any of this? You can start at any one of those points. Like, well, how did a reptile become a bird? Cold-blooded to warm-blooded, from sort of like the way that the legs on a reptile stretch out side to side, whereas the legs on a bird are underneath. So the hip structure has to change. Scales have to become feathers, cold-blooded to warm-blooded. I think a lizard has, or a reptile has, something like a 3-chamber heart or 2-chamber heart, whereas a bird has a 3 or 4-chamber heart. So the whole structure of the bird, but has to change. So anyway, coming back to whale evolution, this is another crucial part. Mammals breathe through their mouth and they eat through their mouth. All right. And we smell through our noses. Okay. Now, a whale has a blowhole at the top of its head. Okay, that's how the whales breathe. We all know that. I would like any evolutionists, I would like Harris Sultan, I would like the apostate prophet, please explain to me with evidence, how did the plumbing and the breathing apparatus change from going from the mouth all the way to the top of the head simultaneously with a female so it could breathe? And how did they survive the process?
True, it had to happen in parallel with another species of one of the same species. Yeah, it had to happen twice. Lightning had to strike twice simultaneously in 2 different places, and they had to be close enough to breed, and they had to be compatible. They had to be compatible to have offspring, and then who did that offspring breed with?
And the thing is, as well, add on to that, mammals give birth head first. Land mammals give birth head first, whereas sea mammals give birth tail first. So the whole birth process has to change. How did evolution know it needed to do that? And how did evolution process that? And how did it survive the transition from going head
Once
first?
I think Dawkins or someone said, but it had to have happened that way. It
Yes,
had to have happened. So that explains it. So it clearly happened, and therefore, okay, that's not an answer. That's begging the question.
And then there's the other issue as well, right? That sea pups require milk that has 30% more fat than, say, creatures or mammals born on land. So you have to ask the question, so how the heck did the female whale mentally project within herself that she needs to produce milk that has a chemical composition of 30% more fat in order to feed her pup? And how did it survive the transition? So that goes out to you, Harris Sultan and the apostate prophet. Simple questions. You obviously believe that Pakicetus became a whale. You've said it in one of your programs in the discussion. Either of you can come on this channel and you know what? I'll even show my face. I won't even hide my ex-Muslim identity behind the camera. I'll even face you in the discussion. So please get on the show. Let's see what your answers are.
You know, you're gonna make me look like I got a face for radio, man. Seriously, Thunderous. If people see you, they're gonna go like, it's like.
Dude, with Darwinian evolution, I am incensed because they teach it as a fact. You get on the television and you've got Uncle David Attenborough using the word evolution as if it's a truth. Then you've got people like Stephen Fry, somebody that England calls a national treasure, and they have this anti-God attitude by saying, well, if I was going to ask a question to God, how dare you give children bone marrow cancer? How dare you give children a disease where a worm grows through the eye? Well, you're missing the points then. You're going on an emotional argument, not a logical one. Where did the flipping eye come from? Eye, optic nerve, the occipital lobe to translate the information that the eye receives. Really? You're trying to tell me that happened by accident? I've got a particular indignation towards Darwinian evolution because I live in a country where the education system only teaches Darwinian evolution with zero evidence. They teach it as a fact. Then they wonder why the country and the community and families are going more and more immoral, because when you start taking the obligation of serving a God out of the equation, when you turn around saying, well, basically you're worthless, you're nothing other more, and you're living in an immoral universe. You've come about from non-existence into existence, and you go back to non-existence. You're completely got no purpose in life. You are pointless. You're nothing more than a product of random mutations. Oh, that's another word. Let's look at the word mutations as well. They would say, and I've had this discussion recently, and I'll call him Cam from Heroin, right? Where we were talking about Darwinian evolution, and particularly the blowhole from the mouth to the top of the head. And his exact words were, that's just a mutation. Well, let's have a look at the word mutation. The word mutation implies in scientific terms that new information, better information, advanced information from previous lower level information. In the history of science and computering, no one program has ever turned into a new program just by blind chance. You don't get better information from old information or existing information. Existing information only produces existing information. The reality of the term mutation is damaged information, broken information, missing information, or information that has been scrambled. So then you can see that in nature, because nature seems to be very good at producing damaged things, but nobody in the history of science or biology has ever seen something new come about, or a new species, or a new advancement in a creature that turns it into another speciation of its own. Absolute bollocks. Sorry, didn't mean to use that word.
It's okay. No, I mean, it's something that I get angry about some things. This is an interesting quote that I saw. You just mentioned, someone mentioned, if you repeat a lie often enough, becomes the truth. And I saw this is a photograph I saw once.
So maybe ask the audience, would they like to do, here's the question for the audience then. Would you like Lloyd and myself to come together one evening? We can plan it for the future, make a set date for it, where we do a Q&A with me on Darwinian evolution. Well, I'll leave you with
I've
that.
got a lot of info on the topic, so.
And we can do a Q&A, Darwinian evolution, why Lloyd and myself absolutely refute it. And you can ask any question about what here, there, everywhere, anything to do with Darwinian evolution, because Lloyd is no doubt an expert on atheism and the history of atheism, but I've read enough books on Darwinian evolution to think that I could hold my own against anyone on the subject. And that's not arrogant, that's more a confidence with indignation.
Yeah, I think the audience would agree with that. Let me just, yeah. Okay, can I just mention one thing, a little off topic, but just to go on the discussion. I think everyone is saying yes. Yes, I mean, that's interesting. It's an interesting discussion for people. And yeah, let me just jump off topic. Yes.
Hang on a minute. I just want to say a couple of things to people that have said things in the comments. Frances Boulet, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
He's in the UK as well. You guys could probably meet up one fine day.
Can you become my mouthpiece to Speaker's Corner? I could become famous. I've got no desire to become famous, but I like to have the fortune of somebody famous, that's for sure. Michael McDonald, can't get enough of this. Dude, get me on this subject, and I get. You need to listen to James Draw. He's a lot more fire and zeal in him. He's a lot more emotional than I am on his subject. Yeah, if you like me, you'll love him. Yeah, this sounds like. But the thing is, guys, you want the show, but you have to come with questions as to. You know, what questions you're going to ask as to why we don't accept Darwinian evolution. I prefer a question posed to me so I can respond, as opposed to having to sit here and trying to think of what the next subject is going to be. Okay, so that we can plan that show maybe for the end of April. That gives you enough time to write some questions down, and then Lloyd himself can come together and do a why we don't accept Darwinian evolution show. What do you think, Lloyd?
Yeah, I'll jump in. But hold on, let me just do something I wanna mention. I just want to kind of important because this happened this week. Yeah, so we will do that. I mean, we can do it next week or something like that. Sunday would be fine. I'd be available. No, not next Sunday. In 2 weeks. Not next Sunday. Next Sunday I'm not available.
It says Neil D asks how to give you questions. Well, dude, just write the questions and then just put them in the chat. We'll sit here waiting for the questions to come up in the chat.
Or I can also make a community post, and you can just drop them in the comments in the community post.
Michael McDonald says Dr. James Tour has brought me here. Well, Michael McDonald, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you listen to that man. Doesn't he fire you up? Doesn't he get you motivated?
You should also listen to Stephen Meyer as well. Brilliant stuff there. I really enjoy listening to Stephen Meyer. Darwin was
So,
rejected by a lot of his contemporaries on
Yeah.
moral grounds because Darwin was clearly, explicitly trying to destroy the concept of God and the concept of morality. Darwin was, someone said to Darwin was rejected by, Don Kay says, by his contemporaries, wasn't he? So the issue being that Darwin was rejected on moral grounds because Darwin clearly had a moral agenda. If he could destroy God, then he could then impose a different moral order. And from what I've shown, if you look at if you watch my Darwin series, which is quite lengthy and detailed, Darwin seems to have been a psychopath. Darwin loved murdering small animals. He would kill
Yeah.
them with his hands. He would murder them with his hammer. He killed thousands of birds for the fun of it with a hammer. He would throw rocks at things. He would shoot them to death. He would any way that he could kill small animals. He would, which we would recognize as psychopathy today. And also, he deliberately wanted to get rid of the idea of God. And in fact, he inspired World War One and World War Two. World War One was fought by the Prussians or the Germans specifically on Darwinian grounds, and Hitler also spoke of fighting World War Two on Darwinian grounds as a cleansing of the inferior life in the world to make way for the superior life. This is all based on pagan Greek and pagan Roman philosophies, really incoherent philosophies, and also there's a very strong tie over, or very strong crossover and tie with Sufi philosophy, Muslim philosophy. If you watch my Darwin series, you'll see that it's all crazy insanity. None of it is science. It is all just mythology and poetry, literally 7th century, 9th century poetry, and philosophies from 2,600 years ago, which they've then just clothed in the words of science. None of it makes sense.
yeah,
Um,
can I just add
yeah,
on that? I think there was something that you and I was going to do. We talked about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that was the recognition that when you look at, say, a particular time period in history, say the Industrial Revolution, up until say the First World War, how many books or theories were produced, how many denominations and Christian organizations came into existence pre-World War One, and how many people were born that have influenced the world, and have basically have allowed it to their philosophies, their ideas to manifest into the society that we have today. And I don't see that as a coincidence that at a particular period of human history, if a literature was being produced, the Bible was being challenged, and we have certain human beings being born during that period of time that have got society to where we are today. And for me personally, when you look at the way the world is at the moment, there is no doubt in my mind we're in a period that the Bible calls the last times, and that's based on Matthew 24:3-14, and 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1-5. Just reading those scriptures and then looking at the world today, to me, is a blueprint of the time period that we have now. And for me, when you consider the Bible's very explicit and clear that Satan and the demons are running the planet at the moment, and that they've got in anger because they've got a short period of time, that's Revelation 12:7-9, that the world, the way that it is at the moment, has been prepped for Satan and the demons to take down as many people as they can.
yeah. Just so as we wind down, someone asked about some books that would be useful. I would strongly recommend Darwin's Doubt is fantastic, by Stephen Meyer. Really enjoyed it. Signature in the Cell as well, and his most recent book, which is The Return of the God Hypothesis, but Mind Beyond the Universe. Stephen Meyer is a very careful author, very good scientist. Definitely things that I would look at. These are fantastic. I really enjoyed Signature in the Cell. Um, and then also just one last, yeah, Thunderous.
I was going to say, can I recommend a few books as well that I've read that I think that have certainly influenced my thinking as far as Darwinian evolution is concerned? That might be not as heavy as those books, but certainly informative.
Yeah, sure. What do you have? What do you have in mind?
The Long War Against God by Dr. Henry Morris. I absolutely recommend this book. The Long War Against God by Henry Morris. No doubt. This book here has a whole heap of information. There's been a couple of books written by Jonathan Wells, Zombie Science, where he challenges all the sort of like the icons of evolution that are being used, like Hegel's embryos, Archaeopteryx, whale evolution, as we've just mentioned, and other things as well. He totally tears those apart. And obviously, I am going to recommend, as I say, I reiterate, I've recommended Dr. James Tour. I'm not recommending his theology. I'm recommending his science. But I'm also thoroughly recommending the book Life, How Did He Get Here by Evolutionary Creation, as published by Jehovah's Witnesses. The science in that book is beyond shadow of doubt the best. Probably the reason why I rate that book so highly is because it covers so many different subjects in a very simplistic way. And at the back of the book, in the index, it gives you all the reference points of where all the information is coming from. And the irony is this: is when you look at those references and you do research on the references, they're all coming. Most of them are coming from Darwinian evolutionists themselves. And people don't seem to understand that Darwinian evolution, or even evolution, isn't this codified religion with a certain set of rules that we're all in agreement on. There is so much infighting within the science of or the sciences that are trying to rule out God as the cause for existence.
Yeah, I just want to let people know, just to plug my own channel here. I've got an entire series. It's in 8 parts. It's quite lengthy. It's detailed. It's very specific, and I discuss Darwinian evolution in depth. Eugenics, scientific racism, scientific genocide. Darwin was a eugenicist. He created eugenics. He might not have named it. His cousin did that. But Darwin was a eugenicist. His entire family were eugenicists. And then also on this final point, so I've got an entire series that dissects the whole history of Darwinism and the philosophy behind it. It is just, it's Darwin, the moral monster. And that he was. Just the final point, just an argument that I've been having with someone in the chat. And they mentioned to me, I was discussing Heraclitus. I was discussing the philosopher Heraclitus. So just to wind down here. And he said that St. Justin Martyr, one of the church fathers, says that Socrates and Heraclitus must be counted among the Christians on account of their dedication to living reasonably. And he says, here you are spouting denigration, calumny, I suppose just to stroke your own ego. Now, so eventually it was like, I'm just blah, blah, lying, blah, 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 nonsense, blah, blah, got terrible character, blah, 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 bad person. Fine and well, okay? Now, I went through the magisterial documents, what their views are in terms of Heraclitus, because Heraclitus is one of the major sources and inspiration to Darwin. Okay, Heraclitus was a major inspiration to Darwin. Heraclitus was incoherent, and the guy said, well, you're calling one of the greatest thinkers, who St. Justin Martyr regarded as a Christian, you're calling him a nut job, a whack job, an irrational fool. Yes, he was a whack job. He was a nut job. The man was an idiot. The man was a complete, I don't know, you pick the word. Seriously, I don't want to swear right now, but the man was not there. The man was idiotically stupid at best. The man was incoherent, utterly insane. Okay, that's the nicest thing I can say about him. Now, here, the simple thing is that Heraclitus had a version of Logos, but he had a materialistic view of the Logos, utterly opposed to he had materialistic monism, which is not the triune Godhead. And also Justin Martyr, as Justin Martyr's quote is typically understood, he did not call these people Christians. At no point did he say that, and this person is wrong. They're completely wrong in making this claim. This is a false claim. What he stated was that Justin Martyr was doing a defense of Christianity to that culture at the time, to those Romans. And he was saying, you are criticizing us Christians. We believe in the Logos. But look, you revere Heraclitus. He also had the Logos. He believed in the Logos. And, you were happy with that. And he would be like the Christians coming to you, and you had no problem with him, but now you got a problem with us. You people are being hypocrites. He did not call him a Christian. He did not say they were Christian, because their philosophies are entirely anti-Christian. Now, either Justin Martyr is stupid for thinking so, and I don't think he was, or this person is taking a very simplistic, childish interpretation and failing to actually understand what Justin Martyr was saying. So basically, the typical view is that if they lived reasonably, they could be considered the Christians in a sense, or Christians in their time, because they were following a Christian concept of the Logos, even though they were not Christians, right? He does not call Heraclitus a Christian before Christ. Now, this person said, but he said that. No, he does not say that. He did not say that, right? So basically, he even speaks of Abraham and Elijah. These are like Christians, of their time. That is called a metaphor. It is not a literal statement. So yeah, I'm. This person was saying that I'm basically a bad person for saying this. So these people, by living reasonably and in accordance with the principles of the Logos, right? But their concept of Logos is different to the Christian concept of the Logos, right? So they were not Christians before Christ, right? They were simply people who had some idea of truth, and they were, as I said, he was making sort of an analogy, not calling them Christians. So yeah, just I wanted to mention that point. And some people don't like that, but that was simply a false analogy. So yeah, and this is a Catholic calling me, blah blah blah. So at least, yeah. Anyway, Thunderous, to end off with you. Yep.
Um, yeah, I just want to say a thank you to everybody that's been putting comments in the comment sections today. I would love to have responded to all of you, but I was concentrating on what I was going to say. There's been some good comments in there, particularly Michael McDonald. I want to give out a big shout to you, Rosanna Rossi. Yes, and to be honest, if I was to go through the names, I'd just name everybody that's in the chat, because you've all said some nice things and some encouraging things, and I just want to say thank you for saying that. I love working with Lloyd. Lloyd allows me to come on his show to have these discussions. I get on very well with Lloyd. We've met in person. Very nice guy. Very, he's as nice as he is on screen. He's even nicer in person, and I say that sincerely. I'm not trying to blow smoke up his posterior.
Posterior.
Yeah, I was trying to be polite. You've had one swear word today. We don't want to get you striked, do we? So I want to thank you, Lloyd, as well. And I was just looking at my calendar. I'm just thinking to everybody, if you really want to have a Darwinian evolution discussion, really put some questions together, write them down, and we can pick a date. I was just thinking, Lloyd, how about Sunday, the 31st of March, as a date to have that
discussion? You want to do it okay, I was thinking 17th or 24th. We want to do 31st, okay?
Yeah, do the 31st, yeah.
Yeah, the next time I'm available to chat with you is the 17th. I've got to do some other stuff this week. I've got a couple of other new series to start on my channel. And Luther being one of them. I've got to start talking about Luther and annoying people. But yeah, the 31st, that's fine. Are we going to meet up on the 17th again, Thunderous?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you want to meet up, I'm available for you, Lloyd. The reason why I was saying the 31st is because for those who watch the show at a later date, they can put some comments in the chat during that period of time, or they may give.
Because I wouldn't meet with you before 2 weeks from now anyway. I'm not available before 2 weeks from now on a Sunday.
Yeah. So as a sign off to everybody.
Oh, the 31st is Easter Sunday apparently.
Okay.
So maybe we should do the 24th.
Okay, well, 24th it is then.
Yeah, 24th. So that's in 3 weeks. I can't do the 10th. Definitely, I'm not available on the 10th at all. 17th and the 24th. So we can meet on the 17th and then do this on the 24th.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being a part of the audience today. And this goes out to the Apostate Prophet and Harris Sultan. You started talking about whale evolution. Now's the time to come on the show and show us what you actually truly know about whale evolution. So it's an open invitation to you guys. Come on the show and educate us about whale evolution. You brought it up, and you said it in a mocking way about people who believe in intelligent design and God. Well, let's see if you've evolved the minerals. Yeah.
So, guys, I promised for the last 3 years I'm going to be talking about Martin Luther any day now. 3 years later, that day is arriving. I need to do a talk prior to this one on Martin Luther, and then we'll dive in. But I'm about to get stuck on Martin Luther, so this is starting to take shape. We're going to learn a lot about the history of Protestantism, about the movement of Protestantism as a political movement, so how can I phrase this? Think of it as Protestantism as jihad for Germans. Right? Kind of, we're going to explain all that. I've already discussed it in the previous talk, but you're going to see that you're talking about a very violent form of mysticism, a very aggressively violent mystical movement. And so someone asked, like, maybe the Protestants have to ask, or Luther and his friends have to ask, are we the baddies? Because, man, once you look at their history, it kind of looks like it. So, But this is coming, and that's definitely coming. We're going to learn a lot about Martin Luther, and we'll be talking a lot about his influence on history. And as far as I can tell, he was a bad man. He was the bad guy. He was definitely the bad guy in this novel. We're going to be discussing that, and I'll be talking about my first talk is going to be a paper on before I get to these slides, and I'll also be doing a secondary talk. I'm going to be talking, as I mentioned, about the oath against modernism and Pius X. Again, it's not explicitly about Pius X. It's about the ideas Pius X was speaking about. And I'm going to be going through that. I'm just busy doing some final touches on some things. You can see these are raw slides. These are not edited. So I need to go and clean these up. But the ones with the titles are done. You can see these are all done here, you know. Oh, David Hume. Oh, by the way, Thunderous, what do you think of this? David Hume. Now people go, well, you know, this was actually a shower cap because this was very popular in the 19th century and 18th century, you know. This was something that English gentlemen wore. And according to the English National Gallery, no, this was not some kind of bed cap or shower cap or comfort cap. It was a frickin' Ottoman turban. David
For real.
Hume loved his Muslim turban. What do you make of that?
Never. I mean, you've only got to go to any museum in this country that has art. You do not see men wearing hats like that or caps like that or head covering like that unless it's a turban, dude.
Yeah, he wore a Muslim turban. So this good Scottishman, you know, now you seriously, this just leads me to questions. Why is Mr. David Hume, who believes that balls can just start rolling off on their own at high speed? I mean, it's complete nonsense. His philosophy is trash. It's just garbage. But yeah, Islam. Yeah, nothing to do with Islam, right? Right, Thunderous?
Nothing to see here, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. So guys, we'll be discussing all of these things, and we'll be coming to, yeah, to a YouTube stream screen near you. So thanks, guys, and thank you, Thunderous. We'll see you guys soon. Take care, guys. God bless.
Bye bye.